Hello. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Thomason, do you want to do roll call?
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that we have 4 members here today. Mrs. Ford is still out of town on summer vacation.
Thank you. We will do a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
Any questions on the agenda? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. At this time, we will recess for the purpose of holding a public meeting on the proposed expenditure budget for the 2017-18 school year in accordance with ARS 15-905.01. Or period, or whatever it may be. Members of the audience are invited to make comments and ask questions during the public meeting. Mr. Holland.
Working. Good morning, President Reese, members of the board, Dr. Thomason. I'd like to talk to you this morning about bringing to you our proposed budget for the 17-18 school year and ask you to please adopt that budget again for the 17-18 school year. So when you're looking at, putting together a school budget, there are many factors that go into play. One of the key factors we'll start off is, of course, is our tax rate. You know, our constituents, our community all want to know exactly what is going to happen to their tax rate for the upcoming year. So in 17-18, our primary tax rate was 4.8445. We had a secondary tax rate of 3.0953, which was made up of 2 different variables. One being our M&O override, being the first year. It was 1.6251, and then we have our bonds, which was 1.4702. Now that is for our debt service repayment schedule, bringing us to a total of 7.9398. In FY18, we are estimating our primary tax rate to be 4.0641, with our secondary tax rate of 3.1600, which is made up of, again, our M&O override of 1.5479, being our second year, as well as our bonds of 1.6121, bringing us to a total of 7.2241 Again, that is estimated because the official tax rate does not come out until sometime in August. So we estimated at this time. So you'll notice, though, that is a decrease of 0.7157. Now, exactly what all goes into developing a tax rate, and why exactly did it go down? Well, some of the key factors is because we have a new tax rate formula. So in in 2016 or FY16, same thing, the Arizona legislature passed a bill that went into effect of July of 2017, where previously in the formula, school districts were allowed to factor in any cash, any encumbrances, or any carry forward balance to help offset the tax rate. However, that is no longer a factor in the budget, the calculation. Excuse me. So that causes basically an adjustment of our rate to technically go up. However, we also have some other factors that go into place. So your qualifying tax rate, that's a tax rate that's set by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee to determine the tax levy required before a district is eligible for equalization assistance. The qualifying tax rate is adjusted annually based on an inverse relationship to the assessed evaluation for the entire state. So for example, if the statewide assessed evaluation goes down, then our qualifying tax rate will go up and vice versa. So what happened this year? So our qualifying tax rate went down because the statewide assessed evaluation went up because there was more properties in which to spread the tax across. So for for example, the tax rate went from 4.1586 down to 4.0468, as well as our assessed valuation went up from 554 billion to 596 billion. So of course there's much more there to be able to spread it across to bring the rates down. So that's always very positive. Again, looking at what also factors into our tax rates, again, we have our M&O override, and of course, so we have our bonds. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the calculation of our maintenance and operation budget. How do we arrive at those numbers? So some overall factors, we have our revenue control limit that calculated out this year to be $58,295,717. We have our M&O override of a little over $9.4 million. We have an estimated budget balance carry forward of about $2.5 million, as well as we have our portion of the state land trust sale, that $50 million that's divvied up to all of the school districts. Our portion this year will be $514,550, bringing us to a total of $70,742,424, which you'll notice is up a little from our 17 budget, which we last revised in May, of $68,283,287. So what exactly does the district plan to do with those increased funds? Well, I'd like to thank the board on behalf of all of the staff for the 2% salary increase for next year. Plus, the additional funding also gave us money for additional teaching positions and other positions within the district as well. So next, I'd like to talk about the 1.06% for teacher pay increase. So what are the qualifications to be able to be eligible for that 106 increase? So you had to be a certified teacher who taught in Arizona in 2017 and continuing to be a teacher in the 2018 year. Exactly what is it based off of? So it's based off of all the compensation that a teacher would have received in 2017, that meaning that salary that came out of our function 1000, which is instruction. You would take whatever that total compensation was in 17, times 1.06%. Now, exactly how are we going to collect all of that information? So several districts are working together to be able to develop a standardized form. The hope in doing that then is, since it's mandated by law, everybody can use the same form. It will ease in trying to collect all the information. Plus, we know that everybody's getting the same information because they're using the standard form that's being developed. So with that form, then the districts are required to collect the salary. We take whatever the total is. We'll have a better idea come October, and then we have a mandatory budget revision that we are required to do and upload to the Department of Education on or before November the 1st. The state will then take all of those budget revisions from all of the school districts, factor them all together, and then they will come up with an allocation that will be awarded out in the month of December. It's the district's plan then to take that additional allocation and pay it out as a one-time stipend to those eligible teachers, and the plan is to pay that out before we go on winter break.
Mr. Holland, I just want to clarify, this is Governor Ducey's requirement. This is what he put into place for teacher compensation. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And so that is above and beyond the 2% that the district had already
Right.
approved. So next I'd like to talk to you about our unrestricted capital budget. So in FY17, we had a capital budget of a little over $14.1 million. To date, so far, we've spent a little over $6.4 million, and right now we have a balance of a little over $7.6 million. However, as you can see, a $14 million budget down to a $7 million budget is not going to be enough to meet the district's needs. So as part of the calculation process and budget development, we then moved $6 million out of our operating budget and moved it over to our capital budget. So we also have our district additional assistance of $822,952, so bringing us to a total unrestricted capital budget of $14,492,952. One key thing or tidbit of information I just kind of want to point out is our district additional assistance calculation actually worked out to be $5,675,536. However, the legislature has included a statewide reduction of $352 million. So basically, it's 85% of that budget. The district then gets the leftover 15%, which again calculated out to $822,952. One thing I wanted to that is important, I kind of wanted to point out, is we just took $6 million out of our operating budget. But if the state would have allowed us to have the $5.6 million that we were entitled to, we wouldn't have had to take that money out of our operating budget to meet the huge capital needs. Again, what are we planning to spend that $14.4 million on? Well, we have our lease payment for our middle schools. We are in the process of doing a new curriculum adoption, as well as potential transfer for adjacent ways, and then the huge capital need we have for the districts and our school sites as well. Next, let's talk about special education. So in 2 years ago, all of the disability category or classifications were broken out separately. However, last year it was approved that all of those classifications could then be rolled together. So that's why you'll see it as just one line this year of the total disability classification. So last year, 17, SPED had a budget of $8.2 million. This year in 18, we've estimated a budget for them of $9.2 million. Plus, we have our gifted education in 17. The district allocated $206,024, and in 18 we've estimated $376,286 But one thing I just kind of want to point out is please know that the state does not provide any funding for gifted education. That is money that the district has set aside for that program. Okay. Also, something else that's a little bit different is our JTED funding. You'll notice it's in two separate lines. So in 17, we had a JTED budget of $212,615. Where in 18, we have a budget of $309,921. But those are now on separate lines because of the new coding that has been issued or implemented by the Auditor General's office. Next, I'd like to talk to you about the calculation for our classroom site fund, or our Prop 301 money. So in FY17, we had our budget minus our actuals, left our unexpended balance, of course. So our total unexpended balance is a little over $2.7 million. We have an additional allocation this year of $5.5 million, plus our $8,000 in interest, bringing us to a total budget limit of a little over $8.3 million. One of the ways of how this funding is to be tracked is it's broken up into 3 different funds, and I'll explain that a little more in just a moment. One thing I wanted to point out about the unexpended or the carryover balance of the 2.7 is we do have teachers that are part of the performance pay. If they don't meet all of their objectives for that year, or if they leave the district, then they don't receive that last performance pay amount. And so then that also is what factors into building up a carry forward balance. But please know that by having that balance is also allowed the district to provide a small increase each year, as well as to meet the additional ongoing demands of expenses for each new year. So exactly how does that break down into our different funds? As I just mentioned, the district strives every year to provide some additional funding each year. So you'll notice in 15-16, we had allocated $5,000. And 16-17, we allocated $5,200. And then in the 17-18 school year, we've allocated $5,893. So that's a pretty good little jump. What goes into that calculation? We have our 17 group weight of our student count times $386. That's actually the allocation itself. Plus, this year, we have a little bit of an increase of $54 per pupil, but made up of that is $19 of part of that 54, which is only one-time funding. That's why I separated it out in each category so you could see, so it didn't get lost. Does that make sense? Okay. It is additional one-time funding, yes, ma'am. So in 11, we had allocated 540 biannually. This year we've increased it to 560 twice a year, giving us a total of 1120. Of the one-time funding, it's $85 per teacher, plus out of the performance pay or Fund 12, we've increased it from $2,700 to $2,750. We have some additional funding, again, one-time funding of $144 per teacher, as well as in Fund 13, we increased it to, it was $675 twice. We've increased it to $840 twice for a total of $1,680. So part of the reason I found a typo, so I apologize for that. That's what happens when you try to change things at midnight. So yes, it was the $1,350, now increasing it to $1,680, but just to try to, for consistency, it was $675, then went to $840. So then we have our additional one-time funding of $114, bringing us to a total of $5,893 available for each teacher. One key thing that I really want to stress, of course, is this funding is scheduled to sunset in 2021. So Let's hope we cross our fingers that it gets reapproved so that we can keep being able to meet that demand and give the teachers that additional funding. So what else goes into our budget? We've talked about several other factors, but we also have, what we haven't talked about yet is our federal funds that we receive. So we have different federal programs. The U.S. Department of Education allocates the funding for those programs, then passes it through to the Department of Education, who then we receive it from the Department of Education. We also have our instructional improvement programs or ending gaming funding. So in 18, we have a budget of $480,000. So we've budgeted $300,000 of that for classroom size reduction. Also, I just kind of wanted to make a note that this is a cash controlled fund, and we have not received our second payment for the 2017 year. So when we receive that additional money as part of that budget revision that we're going to do in October, we will bring in whatever the additional payment is. What happens now? So on June 21st, I brought to you a proposed budget for the 17-18 school year. Today, I'm bringing back that same proposed budget and asking you to adopt it as the 17-18 school year budget for Higley Unified School District. By the 14th of July, the Department of Finance will then upload that budget along with the worksheets to the Department of Education. And then, of course, to meet the requirements, we will send the Department of Education a link from our website where we have posted it there. It'll also be posted on the Department of Education's website, and we also will send it to the Maricopa County School Superintendent's office. Again, as I've mentioned a few different times, we will have another budget revision that we'll have to do mandatory in October. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
Madam President, I just want to thank you again. It's a lot of work, and you always do a very thorough job, and we appreciate the explanations, and I just want to thank you again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
President Reese, members of the board, I would also encourage you, if you have any questions in any specific areas, and to the public too, to please make an appointment with us and come in and talk about some of those areas that you may want some more information in or don't quite understand, because education budgeting can be a little confusing. So please, if you have any questions or anybody in the public has any comments or concerns, please come in and see us, and we'll be happy to sit down with you and explain that.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
like Mr. Glover said, we appreciate the time and effort you put into it. I know I had 2 questions, and each time right before I answered them or asked them, you answered them. So thank you for being very thorough on that.
No problem. Thank you.
And as we don't have any members of the public here, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the public hearing and reconvene in our regular meeting. And therefore, we go on to 5.1. And I move that we adopt the fiscal year 2018 expenditure budget and approve uploading both the notice of public hearing and the budget summary.
Second.
Any other questions regarding the budget? All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That motion carries 4-0. We have one other action item today, and I move that we approve a resolution to determine road construction for a future school site by adjoining owner to be a sole source.
Second.
Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Good? This allows, this is the new site that we have already authorized purchase of. And if I'm understanding, it's a right-of-way issue.
If I may, President Reese and board members, I want to give you a little bit of background on that. The reason that we're bringing the resolution is that the property on which we have, we're in escrow and hope to close very soon. There is a joint development agreement, which the three, at that time, owners of the properties went together to agree to share in the costs of the roadways. At this moment, our property is landlocked. What I gave you is, if you see the lines, and with all apologies to Mrs. Reach, who made colored copies for me, it turned out when I wanted to make a marking on it, it didn't show up. But that blue line on the right-hand side, I made it dotted because depending upon how that industrial piece is developed, that road may not be necessary. So the road across the north of that property, which would then be adjacent to the property that we have intend to purchase, and then going down the west side there, those are the roadways in question. And as I provided you the information, they're currently working on a current estimate because the property that's marked multifamily, the owner of that hopes to be ready very soon to begin that construction. So depending upon the final estimate, we think it's going to be around $850,000. Probably a little bit more because the estimate that we have is a couple years old, but it should be less than $1 million. We do have adjacent ways funds available, and this is a project that's eligible for adjacent ways funding. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Oh, let me just put in about sole source. I do want you to make this determination because we really have no choice because of this joint development agreement. And this, by your making that determination, we would have in place for us to go ahead and do that, and there would not then be a need to put out RFPs for that project.
President Reese?
Dr.
I just wanted to remind the board and the public that the reason why we're going for the purchase of this land is because we had the sale of some excess land at the Bridges area, and statute requires us to go ahead and reinvest that in a like project. So that's why we're looking at this land. If for any unforeseen reason we did not build a school at that property, to sell that property would have to go out to a vote of the public, and the public would have to authorize the school district to be allowed to sell that property, and then the revenues from the sale of that property would go directly to the offset of the taxes that we have for our bonds and other areas, and that is required by Arizona state statute.
Thank you.
But just to clarify, if we chose not to build in the future, this money that we're spending now for the road is done, correct? Like, that's not...
President Reese, members of the board, in all reality, that would be a site improvement, and I believe that we would get the money back in the sale of the land. But at this time, we do plan on keeping the land for future school development, and that is our sole purpose and primary reason why we looked at this piece of land.
Any other questions? All right, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries 4-0. That is all that we have for today. So I will go ahead and move that we adjourn.
Can I just
Oh.
ask one generic question?
Sure.
I guess my generic question to the superintendent or the attorney is, if you could answer this question generically, that with school starting on Monday, only the people that are starting work on Monday they are abiding by contracts that, and job descriptions that were last approved by the board only. Is that how it goes? Just generic.
I'm not familiar with your question, Mr. Witovich. Actually, the board is not required to approve job descriptions. They're provided at the time that a position is approved, so that in bringing to you a request to authorize a new position, you have information about what that's going to be done, what that person would be done if the position is approved. Now, the district has had a practice of bringing updated job descriptions to the board. The job description that you specifically asked about, which was the media specialist, that has been updated. The people who are in those positions have been informed what the duties will be. I think the only difference is that there is the technology piece. And there is going to be a meeting prior to the start of school during the period of preparation for teachers. There's a meeting where representatives of that group of employees will be brought together to discuss what the duties are. Actually, the old description is not very, it's really not out of date. Some of the specifics of what the people in those positions might do are somewhat different. We will bring that, if there's any revision to the job description, it will be brought to the board. But again, that's a practice that the district has.
I understand
has
it's a practice, and I was just asking for a generic. I wasn't mentioning any particular job.
I
Things
understand,
on this
but
campus, but my question is, I want to make sure it's in line with the policy, board policy and procedure, and we can discuss that at another time in reference to that.
It is.
Okay, so I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.